who's our trainer from CSIS, and also Brandy Howdeggy. We're sort of going to be tag teaming this process today. So we'll say, never mind. So that's why there was no hearing. And then I will also figure out here in a few minutes, because once I'm done, to try and get folks to, I see people are like, can I get the PowerPoint? Can I get the PowerPoint? Yes, we'll get you the PowerPoint. I'll figure out how to get it up there. We have 304 people on this webinar the day after Labor Day, and we are moving slowly, so please forgive us. We'll get much better at this process. So the presentation is being recorded, and the slides will be downloadable very shortly. So please, and I see that everybody is starting to put stuff into the Q&A. So go ahead. That's the place to put that, is to put that in the Q&A. I will try and dismiss that as we go. But like I said, we're going to be putting this process in as we go along. We have about 311 people. Oh, I also didn't mention Karina Vargas. I'm so sorry. Karina Vargas is also here on the phone with us. She's going to be kind of walking through the safe portion of this presentation. I'm also supposed to not kick the plug-in for the speaker, or else I'm going to lose everybody. So we will do our best not to have that happen. And then, so we're just going to go ahead and get started. And like I said, this is our first time doing this presentation for you all in a webinar format. So please bear with us as we sort of get things moving and going, and I will figure out how to answer most of your questions. But for right now, instead of putting them in the chat, put them in the Q&A. So if you look down at the bottom where it says, hold on, participants, and then right next to it, excuse me, you'll see Q&A. It's like you were here really with me because I am sneezing and everything. You'll see Q&A, click on it. I will try and go through the questions as they come up. I am starting, and we will go forward with the with this process. Nate, can you go to the next screen?
Sure.
So this is kind of the process we're going to be going through today. We are how sort of the process that we've been through the journey. I always like to start a little bit with the why. Why are we here? Why are we doing this? This feels like it's going to be so crazy this year. And it helps to kind of return to the why of this process. So we're going to start with that. And then we're going to go through a couple of things, starting with the submission process. And then Karina is going to take over and talk a little bit about the data mapping in SAFE. And then we will also then walk through the timeline and the collection and business rules and error and correction. So we're going to be, everyone's going to be talking today, and you're going to hear from a lot of us. Let me just kind of quickly, briefly go through. For those of you who want to call in, if you cannot hear very well, I would call in. And the way that you call in is to very bottom at the left, it says join audio, or there's a little thing that says phone that looks like a phone. Click on it, it'll give you the call-in number. So getting rid of these. I can't control how loud it is through your laptop. You may want to just control that through your own volume. I cannot hear anybody but myself, so I think you guys are okay. So if you're hearing some background noise, or if you're in the background noise like cracking jokes or laughing at us, it's always a good idea to mute that just in case. Will there be a break? Yes, we will work in a break for you all to have a break. I know you're looking at the agenda and going, oh. And someone said, bless you, because I sneezed. They're very kind. And we're working to get those slides. I'll try and get them up in a few minutes. I know you want to tune in before you start. The first few minutes when I'm talking, you all have been seeing that for a while, so it's not a whole bunch of new stuff. Is today's webinar the same as the other 2 dates? Yes. So we're repeating it because we have thousands of users, and so we're going to be repeating this exact same webinar. So if you missed something, or if you join halfway through, or if you're like, I can't be here today, come to the next 2. It's going to be the same. Or if you just want to hear us every day and see where we mess up, you're welcome to come back. Okay. Okay. So I've answered no open questions. Okay. Is there a PDF to download? There isn't a PDF to download right this second, so I will try and answer the questions as we go along in this process. I will repeat the questions as we go along. Okay. Again, questions in the Q&A, not the chat. The chat becomes really hard to manage because there's so many of you. Once we get 300 or 400 people on a webinar, managing the chat is really difficult. Okay, so if we go into the next slide, Nate. Nate, if you could go to the next slide. Thank you. So today I just kind of wanted to talk about, kind of ground us in the why of why we're doing this. And then as we move through, we can kind of see how things are, so you guys can see the progression of things. Can you go to the next slide, Nate? Perfect. So this is one of my favorite quotes. If you've been around me a while, you know this over and over again, that LEAs can use data effectively to develop and foster a culture in which all members understand, apply, and manage data in a dynamic way to focus and improve outcomes for students. So what does that mean? It means we need to move to a more data-based culture in schools and in districts. At CDE, we use data for a lot of things. I've said this before. On any given day, there's 800,000 students with disabilities in California, and there are 12 to 15,000 schools, 2,200 LEAs, and so we cannot look inside the classroom of every student. We have to be able to use data to create a culture where we can effectively identify districts who need support. And so this is the way to do it. And sometimes I know districts are not always data savvy because I'll go into the districts and they'll say things like, oh, teachers will be like, this data thing gets in the way of my real job, or if I didn't have to do this data thing, I could get back to teaching. And we want to move to a place where data is part of the culture of the district. I always joke about my son's class uses this app called Class Dojo. And so every day I see how many points the kids get, or if they get points taken away. And by the time my son comes home every day, I'm like, you got 2 points taken away for shouting out. And, it's that kind of actionable data that helps me as a parent make, teach my son and help him follow the rules. And it's the same kind of thing we can use for our own data to help districts and LEAs improve. If you go into the next slide. Okay, so when I see the data, this is actually what I see. This is the way the data comes to me. If you can go to the next slide. This is actually the data. So if you've heard me talk, you know that when I talk about data, I'm talking about students that sit in a classroom and the way that we describe the story of students. There's one student that sits in your classroom, and should be one story of these students. Next slide. So if you click it again. So the problem is, if we can't see children, what's the story of those children? How do we know what's happening with them? And how can we know how to improve outcomes for them? Next slide. So this is how we have been all the way up until 3 weeks ago. Does that seem about right, Brandon? So I was joking a little while ago that we just shut K-SMIS down August 9th. after its 40-plus years of service to the state of California. So it's now off in retirement land. But for those 40 years, what happened is you'd have your IEP data would be sent through the CASENESS web portal to us here at the Special Education Division. Meanwhile, you have data from your student information system sent directly to the CALPADS application, which would go directly to Brandy in the Educational Data Management Division. So we'd have two systems that would exist in a district and two systems that existed in CDE. And so what was the result of that? The result was we'd have different sets of data. So I would have the same student who had different genders, different birth dates, different names, different race ethnicities, different identifications of disability. And so that became a concern of me because if we have one child who sits in the classroom, we should only have one story of their data. Next slide. So one child sits in your classroom. Next slide. And then one child should be represented in all of your data systems. So that's sort of been my mantra for a while. I also want to be able to stand by every number. I want to be able to say, this is the true data. I have to actually personally sign assurances that go to the U.S. Department of Education that our data about students with disabilities is valid and reliable. And the only way I can do that is being able to stand by every single number. And so if one district in California forgets their data or doesn't get their data right and we have to change it, I have to be able to explain to the U.S. Department of Education why our data has changed from year to year. In addition to that, I want to be able to tell the story of what's happening in California. So when people ask, how are students with autism doing in California? How are students with orthopedic impairments doing? Or what are their needs? Or where are they struggling? I want to be able to tell that story about our state. And I can only do that if the data is valid and reliable. Next slide. So bad data loses children. If you'll click it one more time, Nate. So, and I always tell the story that this really stuck with me. For example, I went to a district and they tracked a lot of their transportation through their electronic IEP system, but they used the data from their student information system as the way to identify where students lived. And so when they were providing transportation to children to and from their homes, they would use that data from their student information system. Well, for one child, the child had moved and it hadn't been updated. The special education department knew that the child had moved, but the student information system had never been updated. So what happened was the bus came and picked the child up and dropped them off at a place where no one lived anymore. And it was sort of a big problem because the child was sitting out there and waiting for their parents to come get them and nobody came. And so that's what happens when you have bad data, when you have a point where you lose children. We often have times where districts are caught in DINK, which is obviously the data identified noncompliance, and folks say to us, well, that child left a long time ago, but we've been reporting them, we forgot to exit them. And I'm like, well, where did they go? What happened to them? And sometimes people just don't know. And so it's important for us to be able to address those issues. And next slide. Okay. So you're the ones that ensure high quality data. I cannot explain or express to you how much I am dependent on each and every one of you to provide me the data that help me do my work. And in fact, I'm so dependent on the actual person pushing the buttons. My job and the work that I do, there's a direct line from the person who's entering the data, who's often a data clerk. And so I talk to folks and they'll say to me, well, I'm just not engaged in data, or I don't feel like it's important, or I think data goes into a black hole. And I want to say, you don't know how important your data is for me, because it helps me tell that story. In fact, so much so that I stand up in court many times and under oath to a judge, and I testify to the reliability of our data because I truly believe that you all do the best work you can do to ensure high quality data. Next slide. So the question that we want to move forward with is, what's the story that you want to tell? What does it want to look? What is the story going to look like for you going forward? Because now at the top at CDE, we're going to have one system that the data is going to come to, and this is going to be a bumpy ride. I haven't been joking about this when I say this is going to feel a little bit bumpy. We are moving to this new system, this new process, and so it's going to feel very much like, some of you may feel like, okay, how close am I to retirement that I have to keep doing this? So I want you all to get back to the why of why we're doing this work and why it's really, really important. Next slide. Because the data that we're going to be collecting now through CALPADS is only going to be used for more things. We're going to be using it, continuing for the dashboard. So now the program 144 code is going to go away, and so all the data that you're inputting through SAFE is the way that we are going to identify students with disabilities for the dashboard. In addition to that, we will be using the data for monitoring to ensure that compliance with the law, and we're going to ensure things like safety under restraint seclusion and discipline. So there's going to be things that we're going to be using the data for more and more and more. Next slide. So now where do we go? How do we go forward? So this is the place where we're starting. And as you can see, I love this picture because it looks like it's a perfectly serene road that goes straight down. But if you look closely, you'll see that there's some cracks, there's some bumps. If you get further along, there's probably a few potholes, which is exactly what it's going to feel like. It's going to feel bumpy for both us and you. We are also learning in this process. Folks tell me all the time, or they ask me all the time, like, okay, so if this whole CALPADS thing doesn't work out, what's your backup plan? And I say, I don't have one. This is the plan. This is what we're doing. And we are going to move forward and we're going to make this happen because it's so important to tell that story and tell it accurately. Next slide. So this is what it's going to look like starting in what, 7 days? Yeah, 7 days. September 10th is when CALPADS opens for Fall 1, and that's the time when all the data is going to start moving through into all your IEP data is going to start moving into CALPADS. Brandy just choked a little bit realizing how close it was. We're all feeling like, it's happening, really happening. I've been talking about it for 5 years, and now we are like less than a week away. So it feels a little bit crazy to me. Okay, so this is what it's going to look like. You're still going to have 2 systems at your LEAs. So I don't know if you just have folks from SACE on just your SACE folks on the phone, or just your special ed folks on the phone, or if you also have your CALPADS coordinators on the phone, or maybe you want to come back next week and invite those folks to listen in with them so that they can also hear this as well, because we're not just going to be talking only about special education data. There's going to be a part of this that is for CALPADS coordinators so that they understand the requirements around this data and what the process is going to be. But you're still going to have 2 systems. You're going to have a student information system, and when I talk about a student information system, I'm talking about things like ARIES or Infinite Campus or Power Schools or any of those student information systems where you track attendance, discipline, all of those things. When I talk about the electronic IEP system, from here on out we'll use SACE because you all should be SACE users. And so that's what we're talking about, is your SACE system. So you're going to have both of those systems feeding into CALPADS. The difference between the SIS and the SACE system is that the SACE is going to be submitted directly through an application program interface, which means you won't have to extract a file from SACE and submit it to CALPADS like you've had with CaseMIS or like you would do with the student information system. The data will go directly. You'll sort of log on to SACE, and Karina will kind of walk us through that process. Also, keep in mind, we've been working with SACE for a little while, but we're all sort of building this plane as it's beginning to fly. So that we're going to be making adjustments on the fly. So be patient and loving with your SACE folks as well, because they also have a heavy lift. but the data, you'll be logging onto your SAFE system and you'll be submitting the data directly through SAFE, and you'll be getting your error reports back through SAFE so you can correct them there. However, viewing reports and certifications will happen through the CALPADS system. So it'll feel a little bit like a hybrid for right now. Next slide. I see some questions coming in. I'm just going to go through a couple more slides, and then we'll get into the questions. So we'll have some time for questions. Can you click again? There you go. So going back to the why of why we do this work, this is why we do this work. Because we want to tell the story of students with disabilities in California. And so you are the voice of those children, the way that we see them here at the department. The only way we see that data is through the only way we see those children is through the data you provide us. If you click one more time, and then next slide. So how far we've come. Whew. I feel like I've been showing this slide for 5 years. And it's probably pretty much that way. If you've been around a while, I see some of my old friends around on the attendees. Kim Gavin, you got all of my all the people I've seen for a long time here. Jennifer Martin, all these people who I've seen at many Case Miss Roadshows, Lisa Dreyer. So I see so many familiar names, some new names, which is exciting to see. Hopefully it's also many of our CalPADS folks. They've seen, if you've been around on my Case Miss Roadshows, you've seen this slide many times. But just to kind of help you understand where we've come, we started in 2015-16 planning this process. So Brandy and I have been partners in crime on this for a little bit of time, and now we're moving into the full implementation. So in 16-17, we began to develop the structure, started communicating, training. In 17-18, we continued the communication efforts and the training as we developed the tables. And then in 2018-19, last year, we started a 2-phase implementation process. So the first phase of that implementation was to completely change the structure of CaseMIS so that it matched the file structure of CalPADS. So that when we move into changing the process, you wouldn't also have to learn all the new field names and all the new table codes and all the new codes within the field. You would already understand what the actual structure of the file would look like. Now in 2019-20, we're into the full implementation. Now the process of submitting is what will change. Next slide. So this is what it's going to look like this year, 7 short days. It will begin this process. I'm probably giving Karina a little bit of a heart attack. She's probably feeling that same way. So the CalPADS student profile will not change. That will be the master data for all of the enrollment information and the demographic information. And then the discipline files will not change. But what will be added is the special education file. So the special education program file is what used to be called Table A. And the student services file is what used to be called Table B. And then post-school outcomes, which is we're not going to be talking about much today, is going to be an end-of-year file, which is our used to be Table D. So that's kind of what it looks like. Next slide. So the way we used to submit data, this was prior to 18-19, was you'd have a single data submission that would have the IEP date, the IEP information, the triennial date, the triennial information, any delay reasons, and that would be one row of data for each student. So if you had 100 students, then you would submit 100 rows of data. That's not how it's going to be anymore. Next slide. Now, for every transaction that you have, initial evaluation, annual IEPs, triennials, amendments will happen, will actually be submitted to CDE. And so you could have 2 or 3 records for each child. So you could have 100 students and potentially have 150 or 200 records sent to CDE. Next slide. So how do we get from here to there? That's what we're going to be talking about today. This is really about the nuts and bolts of what it's going to look like in your SAFE system and what it looks like at CALPADS when you log on to view the reports. Next slide. So to me, this is kind of what the process will look like. So you log on to SAFE and access CALPADS through the API. You submit the data to CALPADS through the API. The error records are returned to SAFE through the API. You may have to go back and correct the data and return those records up, send those records back up until they're accepted. And then once you have no more errors and all of your records have been successfully submitted, you log on to CALPADS to review the reports. If the reports indicate a problem, you're going to make corrections and redo steps 1 and 2. And then LEAs will approve the data and log on to CALPADS and approve the submission. And then CELPAs will log on to CALPADS and approve the submission. And then the data is certified. So this is kind of how we're going to break down what we're talking about today. So we're going to kind of work through this process as this is kind of how we've structured today's training, is to kind of go through some of these steps. Next slide. Okay, can you click again? Yes. It's going to come on. As those are kind of coming up, I'm just going to so they're getting a couple of questions about seeing the Q&A. I'm not sure exactly how that works. What we will try and do is see why folks can or cannot see the Q&A, but I will repeat the questions as they're answered if they're not answered. So, so if we don't have access to CALPADS, would we get the reports from our CALPADS person? So we're going to talk about that, what the roles are and who's going to have access to CALPADS. So some people asked, we used to upload SAFE to ARIES to make sure the data was the same. Now that CALPADS is receiving SAFE directly, will there be an export from SAFE or CALPADS into ARIES? So here's what will happen, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later. We will be doing a consistency report. What are we calling it? A discrepancy report that will show the discrepancies. Now, the source of the enrollment data will be your ARIES system or your student information system. However, so that's where the master data is. But when there's discrepancies between the two systems, we're going to send you a report. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. When will CELPA directors have access to CALPADS? I created an account for ours, but I'm still unsure how the exact process will go about. So we're going to be talking about that with the CELPA directors this week at their CELPA meeting.
But just FYI, the accounts can't even be created with the specific roles until everything goes into production, which, as Shiloh mentioned, isn't happening until September 10th. So we're preparing for that, but again, September 10th is the live date.
So somebody's asking about discipline. Discipline is coming from SAFE. No, discipline has not come from SAFE for 4 years. It always comes from your student information system. Okay, so I just briefly wanted to go over some vocabulary. So if we have any of our student information system, folks, they may not, or our CALPADS folks, they may not be aware of these. And then somebody asked in the chat, what does API mean? Here we go, yay! Sometimes people ask. So it says student information system, that's the SIS. So student information system, things like ARIES, Power Schools, the special education data system, that's what we'll be referring to as, that's SAFE in this presentation, but it's always your electronic IEP system. CELPA is your special education local plan area. Every district is a member of a CELPA. SWD is students with disabilities. And API is an application program interface. IVR is input validation rule, and CVR is certification validation rule. And then we'll talk a little bit about independently reporting charters, which are IRCs, and CASENIS, one last go around. CASENIS is the California Special Education Management Information System, and it is what we used for 40 years to collect data about students with disabilities, but it is no longer functioning. Next slide.
Before we go ahead, Shiloh, I just have two things about the chat. During the break, Marshall will be able to share out the presentation. And,
okay, great.
And then for those of you who are unable to see the chat, you have to open it up. The controls should be at the bottom of your screen.
Right, and but Nate, they were actually trying to look at all the questions in the Q&A, not necessarily the chat.
I'm sorry. No,
yeah.
The Q&A is the same way.
Okay.
Marshall just confirmed that that's how it behaves. They have to click the icon at the bottom of the screen that says Q&A.
Perfect. But will it show them all the questions that are being asked?
My understanding it is. Slyman is logged in, and that's how his is operating now.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so just make sure you open up the Q&A to be able to see that. Okay, so so just answering a question here, a couple more questions before we move on. I understand that data will be reported to CALPADS from SACE, but can we also pull data from SACE through CALPADS into our SIS?
Yes, you could, but I guess my question would be why? Because you should be sharing data between the two systems even before it comes up to CalPADS.
Yeah. So that integration and that crossover should happen before the data comes to CalPADS. And I know Karina's on, and she can talk maybe a little bit more about what that might look like for SACE users. Karina, are you there?
Good morning. This is Karina and Christy.
Hey, welcome. Do you kind of want to talk a little bit about, for folks who have integration, how that should kind of be happening first before the data goes through CalPADS?
Yeah, a lot of the districts are currently doing it, nightly integration, importing from their SIS to SACE and vice versa from SACE to their SIS. I think a lot of the questions I'm seeing in the Q&A are more geared toward manual downloads of data that they've done in the past, where they would generate a CalPADS report, the CASENIS CalPADS report, and manually upload that into their SIS. And so what we just want to make sure that everybody understands is you still have that capability of generating a CalPADS report in SACE, but please do keep in mind that this is now transactional data. So where before you would get one record per student, you're going to have multiple records. So your SIS has to be able to handle that. Does that make sense? I mean, obviously nobody can answer that. Shiloh, does that make sense?
It makes sense to me.
Yeah, so somebody was asking, well, what if we don't have the integration? You know, the integration doesn't have to be something you do with technology. You all can be working together to have processes in place to make sure that you're sharing data as it happens. So if you're getting data, you have data that comes in and you're sharing it. You have a process that when an address changes for a child or a name changes for a child, that you can change that in both systems. So you call up the person who's in charge of that, or whatever processes. It's not always about a technological integration. It's about having processes in place to ensure that you are entering the data correctly, that you're checking the data, and that you're correcting it when it needs to be corrected. Okay. Okay, so, next slide. Okay, Karina, this is you.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Shiloh. This is Christy Swenson. Obviously Karina is in here with me as well, but I'm going to be going over the process of how this will work in SACE. And this feature I know a lot of you are dying to see this. It is going to go live on Sunday, September 8th. And then we will be providing a step-by-step guide along with a video on this process. So what we're going to do first is actually go over like the PowerPoint to provide you with all of the information, and then we'll go in live into the system and kind of just do a brief overview of how it will work, because that will make most sense. And so real quick, I know I need to share the screen. So give me 1 sec.
I'm already seeing it.
Perfect. And share. Okay, and everybody see, or Shiloh, you see the screen correctly?
Yes, we see it.
Okay, perfect. All righty. So, you know, we're talking about how the reports, of course, are going to go back and forth in this automated process. It is semi-automated, but the user will still have to do some work in SACE. So the CALPADS reports will be generated in SACE, and they will be uploaded directly to CALPADS through the API portal that is within SACE. So now that the reports will be generated at the district level, the district will need to identify a specific user to actually generate the reports and submit to CALPADS. This user will also need to have a CALPADS user account. So this should be like the current district special ed data technician, or whoever the data person is at the district. Due to their knowledge of SACE, the access they have to the IEP information, and the contact they have with the case managers, you know, and the IEP staff if they do need to, you know, review those transactions or have any questions. However, it is important that the CALPADS data coordinator and the special ed kind of data technician communicate often, as it is expected that the SIS and the special ed data align. Now, a CALPADS file should be uploaded monthly at a minimum to capture all of the student changes that are occurring, because since student data will be sent transactionally, you know, like as we said, there could be multiple errors per transaction. So uploading files monthly or even weekly, depending on the size of your district, will allow sufficient time to correct those errors. So up until now, all of that special ed data was submitted to CASEMIS. So we're using the June 30th report as like the baseline of data going forward. So in order for all of your active students to be included in the upcoming Census Day report, we have included the transactions for all of the eligible and pending Plan Type 300 students from the June 30th report. So that data should be submitted to CALPADS along with any new transactions that have occurred since July 1st. So here's how a transaction will be generated in SACE. When the case manager affirms an IEP, so you know, with an initial, an annual, or triannual, when a student is exited from special education, excluding Code 76 for transfers, when a student status is changed to D&Q, so your plan type 700, 800, 900 students, when a pending student's plan type is changed to 300 once they receive parent consent for their initial eval, and when specific fields and amendments are updated. So for each of these transaction types, there's no new process that's been added for SACE users. The only change is like the importance of case managers affirming the IEPs and amendments and submitting the student change forms as soon as, you know, eligibility is determined, as this is the only way that student data will be captured. So again, nothing new on the user end. We will be creating these transactions when each of these instances occur. So we'll do a little walkthrough about how the reporting process will work. So before a report is generated, you'll actually want to review the transactions that have taken place. So when you go to the CALPADS transaction page, the type of transaction will be defaulted to reportable transactions. And this will include all of the transactions from the June 30th report, again, and any transactions that have occurred since July 1st. So what you can see here in the results is on the transaction created, you can see that this one is from June 30th and the transaction type is June 30th. So you know this came over from your June CALPADS report. The one above it here says the transaction was created on August 22nd, and the transaction type was an affirmed IEP. So that's how you'll be able to tell if this carried over or if this is a new transaction and that transaction type. So due to that initial load of data with the June 30th transactions combined with the July 1st or after transactions, data reconciliation will be needed. So the first thing that you would want to do is view your duplicate transactions. So in the type of transactions dropdown, you would select duplicate transactions. So a duplicate transaction has the same meeting type and meeting date. So this would occur in this example is if those, since we did pull those transactions from the June 30th report, and say the teacher comes back or the provider comes back after summer break and says, oh, I have these unaffirmed IEPs, let me go ahead and affirm them. Well, now, of course, now we know the affirm process will generate a transaction. So now you have a duplicate. So you'll just review both of the transactions to determine which one should be reported, and then the other one can be marked do not report. So in this case here, we can see that this student has two meeting type 40s. Both the meeting date is on May 1st, so they held a meeting at the end of the year. And we can see that this first line came from the June 30th report because we pulled that data directly from the student record. And the provider comes back in July and says, oh no, I forgot to affirm, let me affirm now, and now created that transaction saying affirmed IEP. So you can edit the or view the transaction by clicking on the edit icon to kind of see that data. Keep in mind, especially for this initial load, that the information from the June 30th transaction was their current school, their current grade, current district at that time. Now that we've crossed over summer, some of that data could have changed, such as their district of service or their reporting LEA, possibly their grade level, or obviously their grade level, and possibly their school of attendance also. So keep that in mind when you're reviewing your duplicate transactions, and then again, click the do not report icon for whichever one you're not going to send up. So after you review your duplicate transactions, then you're going to want to review your transactions that do not have an SSID. So as you know, we don't stop the affirm process due to an SSID being, not being entered, but we do alert you that it will result in a CALPADS error. So as you review your blank SSIDs, if you now have the SSID number for the student, once you enter that onto the student record, it will automatically insert that SSID into those transactions. So that is something, of course, you're going to want to keep updating those records, and then that will auto-populate. You're not going to have to do duplicate entry. So once the transactions have been reviewed, now we can generate a report. So back to your type of transactions, back to your reportable transactions, and then you'll click the Generate Report button. When you click this button, it will automatically direct you to the CALPADS Generated Reports page, which is formerly known as the CALPADS Report page. So this is the report that was generated. So if you want to review the transactions that are included with this specific report, you can click the View Edit Report Data. So this will show you all those transactions for this report. And then you have your Students and Services file under your Tables column. So again, if you wanted to download that information, it'll download it right into Excel. So to actually submit your report to CALPADS, again, remember this user has to have a CALPADS login as well. So at the top of the page, there is a Log into CALPADS button. This is that whole API portal. This is it right here. So you click Log into CALPADS. It will automatically direct you to the CALPADS login page where you'll enter in your username and your password. And then once you click Login, it directs you right back to SAFE. So you're not actually going to be working in CALPADS at this time. So this is the portal that allows you to log in and redirects you back to SAFE. That's it. So now we're ready to actually submit a file. So the SPED file or the student file must be uploaded first, and it has to be error-free before you can submit your services file. So to submit your file, you do have to do something. This is where I think that automated is getting maybe confused, because you do have to still click a link to actually push the data. So you will click on the Submit SPED File link, and this will push that file to CALPADS. And then you'll notice once you click the link that this now is your active report. This is the report that you have submitted and that you're going to retrieve errors for. This will show you the status of the report. So once you submit, it will be in queue. So depending on, maybe how many transactions are in the report, how many other reports are being submitted at that same time, it may take a little bit of time for it to actually send those errors back to you. So all you have to do is click the Refresh SPED File Status link, and that will just click it every so often to refresh the file status until it says ready for review. So once the file has been processed and the errors have been generated, we'll notice right here the status says ready for review, and then now this link has changed to say Get SPED Errors. So once you click the Get SPED Errors link, you will notice how the process options change here. You have the option to download your errors. So this will just download your error file into Excel. And then you have the option to post your errors to the homepage as normal, so that way staff can go and correct their errors like they're used to doing. So to submit those errors, or to upload the errors, click the Post Errors link. And then again, as you're used to doing, enter the message for the staff. This will display on everybody's homepage. And then the errors have already been tied to this upload. And then just select the user levels of who's responsible for correcting these errors. So just select the user levels and then click the Post CALPADS Error button. And if you want to remove the errors from everybody's homepage, then you can just click the Deactivate Report button.
We want to make it clear that these errors are only available for district schools and case managers, not to SELPA.
Yes, and because the reporting is at the district level, you'll notice that there's only 3 checkboxes instead of 4. The SELPA has been removed from this option because it's the district and below that would be correcting the errors. So only district, school site, and case manager. So fixing the errors, oh, go ahead.
Karina, this is Karina and et al. Christy, did you want to go through? We've got about 20 or so questions. Did you want to sort of go through some of them?
Okay, yeah. Sure. Give me 1 sec. Let's go ahead and bring those up.
I'll sort of let me get rid of some of them. Okay. So starting sort of with Jessica Wilson, I'm not sure that answered my question. I used to upload a file into Aries and into CALPADS. That upload is not available in SACE right now. I would like them to match.
Okay, I found that one. So Jessica, right now we have the Generate Report button disabled until this Sunday when these new transactions and the process takes place. Again, I really want to be clear that the old process where you would generate a CALPADS report would only pull 1 record per student. This new process that goes live this weekend will generate the same file specs, the same data fields for those students, but it's going to be transactional, so you will have more than 1 record per student.
Okay. And then, so I think this, so yeah, Heather Defeat, and then I think on down.
Can you see the questions, Karina
and Christy?
Yeah, so I think the next one was Rose. What about since we put in pending so we can generate a prior written notice? They'll be reported as well as they have been in the past if their plan type is changed to 300 and their meeting type is code 30. For duplicate transaction, oh, did I skip one?
You may want to read the questions out loud so everyone can hear them.
From Rose, it was, what about since we put, I was trying to write any changes. 932.
So I have this one. For duplicate transactions, do we submit the June data or the data with new school of attendance, grade, etc.? I'm not sure I understand the question, Heather. Maybe you could be more specific, and we'll circle back to you. From Jamie Croc, from the two duplicates, which one should be reported? The one that was imported?
Okay, so I think we can kind of go over that. So the reason there's duplicate transactions when we're looking at the example in the PowerPoint is due to unaffirmed IEPs. So when we generate the CALPADS report on June 30th, it pulled information, the most recent information from the student record. Staff had not affirmed those IEPs, so for that example, it was a meeting held in May. The data was pulled for the teacher's report, and then subsequently the teachers went back in the new school year and went through and processed the affirmed IEP. The data should have reflected the information from that meeting back in May, not new information, so in theory it should be the same, but that's why you'd want to double check both transactions and identify which of the two you'd want to report to CALPADS. The next one I see is Jamie from the more duplicates. So let's see. So Kara, for those of us from multiple district CALPADS, are you seeing this process data reconciliation error checks being done at by each district technician or by the CALPAD technician? So at this point, the reporting process is handled at the district LEA level. At the CELPA level, you can see all the exact same information at CELPA-wide, and if you have the proper permissions, you will be able to edit the information. But ultimately, the reports are being generated at the district level, and they're the ones responsible for submitting to CALPADS. So it would be a local decision and process that you guys would have to define who's doing what. So Rose, so in the past, if an IEP was not affirmed yet, but the data didn't go to case miss. Sound like it's changing, but many times teachers work on IEPs and make changes before holding the meeting and then affirming. So in the past, unaffirmed information did go to case miss because we would always generate the reports on June 30th or December 1, and it would pull the most recent information from the student record. That is no longer the case. As of July 1st, only affirmed information will be added to the CALPADS transactions page. So if it's an unaffirmed IEP, they hold a meeting and they do not affirm that information will not get reported to CALPADS. Gina, oh no, okay, our local CELPA will also receive the errors, correct? So Sylvia, the question was, our local CELPA will also receive the errors, correct? That's not correct. The errors are at the district level only, and so when the district submits the data to CALPADS, retrieves errors from CALPADS, it will be posting that back onto their district level dashboard, their homepage. You will not see CELPA-wide errors any longer. I think we have a few of those questions. Can we get a permission in CALPADS now from our CALPADS person? That might be a
Brandy?
Yeah. So can an account be created for the SPED coordinator at the district level? So the answer is an account can be created right now, but unfortunately the roles that you will need to do review and be able to view data in the system will not be available until September 10th. But it doesn't mean the account can't be created. It can. It's just that the roles that you need will not be available until the 10th of September. But yes, the CALPADS administrator would be the one to create that account for you.
We have a question. It says, I am the ARIES admin and the LEA CALPADS admin. For enrollment information, wouldn't the SIS be considered the primary source?
Yes, and I'll be going over this in a lot of detail, so just give it a second. We'll get there.
And I do want to clarify on that release date. So for SAFE, we're releasing the new pages and the new permissions to view these transactions on Sunday, but the actual data submission to CALPADS is not going to be available until CALPADS does their release, which is slotted for the 10th.
Yes.
So you'll be able to see everything, see all your transactions, edit the information if need be, do your data reconciliation process before the 10th. The button to actually log on to CALPADS is going to be disabled until the 10th.
Okay, so I'm just kind of clearing some of these questions. They're coming fast and furious now. Just to clarify, if the local CELPA is submitting for more than one LEA, the individual LEAs will be responsible for correcting their errors. So like in a multi-district CELPA. So here's one of the big differences, and we talked about this we've been talking about for a little while. CALPADS is an LEA level system, right? So there will still be a role of the CELPA, but the first step is at the LEA level. And so cleaning up the data, and it's very similar in some ways. I think it's a change in process, because what would happen is typically the CELPA would get the list of errors, they'd split it up by the LEAs, and they would work with their LEAs to correct the data. So we're just sort of like making that process a little bit more automated now. So when you log on to your system, in this case SACE, at the LEA level, you have your error report and can begin the correction level. And so that's kind of the difference that's occurring here. And so if you're in a multi-district CELPA, then what will happen is the correction process will start at the LEA level. And so they'll be getting those errors through the SACE system at the LEA level to correct them there. And then working with you if they have questions about data quality, about law, about those kinds of pieces. So let me I'm trying to get rid of the questions as they come up. So we submit the CALPADS reports monthly. Can we choose the date? You can, it's at minimum monthly. I think you can choose the date. My suggestion to you is if you are a larger LEA is to do it more often if possible, because especially at first you potentially will have a lot of errors to correct, and that the best way to start kind of getting through them and getting through a process and figuring out, hey, we have issues around not putting the correct enrollments in or not putting the correct information in here, and that's why we're getting all these errors. It's going to be helpful for you to start submitting a little bit more regularly, and then once you have a process in place, going to a monthly level. But you can choose the date. Okay, done. Is there going to be a reconciliation process between the existing 144 records in CALPADS and the data in SACE?
No. So 144, and I'll cover this shortly, but the program record 144 that you're typically used to sending up in the student program file from your student information systems, that code was retired as of June 30th, 2019. Therefore, one of the questions is, oh, so we don't need to send up an SPRG from the student information system. Yes, you will, but it should not contain that 144 record. All of that information and the indication that a student is a student with disabilities actually will come up directly from SACE. Now, does it mean that your student information systems, Q, Power School, Aries, that they don't need information that the student is a student with disabilities? I would say that's not accurate. If that student information system needs information that the student is a student with disabilities, does it need to capture all of the transactions that occur for those students? No, right? But the student information system has to be able to just identify a student with disabilities, and in some cases like their primary disability, for example. So there is a minimum of information that would be needed in the SIS, but the information that's sent to CALPADS is not going to be coming from your SIS anymore.
Okay. So we're getting a number of questions that are super specific to an LEA. Like, we have a weird program that elephants sometimes visit, and we don't know how to code that. I'm not going to be answering those questions in this forum. What we will do is I will put into the Q&A, contact calpads-support@cde.ca.gov, and then we can address that specific issue, because it's not a global issue. It's a thing that's just specific to my LEA, and so we want to make sure that we're conscious of folks' time today. This is a 3-hour webinar. It's very painful to sit on a phone for 3 hours. So I don't want to go through like my specific weird things, like when we have hurricanes and tornadoes that happen at the same time in my one little fantasy place. We're not going to do those really specific questions, but I will push you towards the CALPADS support, and we will work through getting your question answered there.
And I'll just add to that, the same thing with all the process questions, whatever you see in SACE. We would highly recommend that those questions be submitted to the help desk, and we'll answer them there as well. And then we'll even compile a general Q&A type document and share that with everybody.
Somebody asked about 504s. None of this is about 504s. So we are only collecting data on students with individual education programs that fall under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is not 504. 504 is separate. So 504 is submitted through your student information system, through CALPADS. We do not collect it through this system. So, okay. I'm just sort of trying to get rid of some of these. Christine, Karina, if you just probably speak up a little bit, people are having just a little bit of hard time to hearing you.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
I'll sit closer.
That's kind of always how it is. You like try and sit really close to the phone. Thank you all for being patient with us as we kind of get through this.
I think if you... Oh.
Go ahead.
I think, is it okay if we just get back in?
Because there are so many questions, like let's get through a little bit more.
I'll try and dismiss the ones we've already answered, and then answer if they're CDE ones or stuff we've already gone over. I'll answer them directly, and then hopefully by that time you get back through your part, we'll have just some core sets of questions.
Sounds good.
Okay.
All right, so fixing your errors. Again, this is a process that you guys are already familiar with. Once you posted the errors, it will display here on your home page. And so you just click the Fix Errors button, and it will display the results of all of the students with errors. And you'll have your errors and warning columns with the description of the error or warning, along with the error code. And then to correct the error, you would just click on the Fix Errors or the wrench icon. Now, since this is transactional, when you click the wrench, it is not going to update the student record. It's only going to update this specific transaction. When you click on the wrench icon, all of the errors will display at the top of the page. And we have also just added an info icon that will give a better description of the error and which fields are being validated to generate that error. And we have also, since they are a little bit lengthy, have included a download of the complete error code definition. So if you just want to download that and kind of save it to your desktop, so as you're reviewing, you don't have to keep clicking on the info icon. It's just a nice little handy guide here. And this is from CALPADS, not our made-up descriptions. And the error will also display next to the field. So once you correct the error, you're going to save the page, and then it's recommended just to click the error check button just to verify that no additional errors exist. And once the error is corrected, it will be removed from this top section here. And when you return back to the kind of like the home page report page, it will be removed from there as well. So after you've corrected your errors, this is when you would resubmit your file until it's error-free. So we would hope that after the errors have been removed from the homepage, it should be error-free. So this kind of works just like when we worked on the copy of the case miss report. You would just keep resubmitting that file until you are error-free. So you would do the same thing here. So you're going to click the Resubmit SPED file link. That will send those transactions back to CALPADS to validate that there are no existing errors. And if there somehow an error was generated based on the correction, you would just go through the same process of refreshing the file status, retrieve the errors, post the errors back to your home page, and you would just continue the same process until the SPED file is error-free. So once the SPED file is error-free, you'll know that because it will say posted and it will say file is error-free. You can now submit your services file. So there's definitely a clear indication of when you can submit your services file, and your rejected records will equal 0. So for the services file, same process as the student file or the SPED file. You will click the submit services file link, and then that will submit it to CALPADS. The errors will be sent back to SACE. You'll post those errors to your home page. You'll correct all those errors. You'll resubmit the file to ensure that it's error-free. And then once both the SPED file and the services file are error-free, both of the statuses will display posted and file is error-free. Once the students or the transactions are accepted, all of those posted transactions will move to the transactions accepted by CALPADS page. So in that type of transactions dropdown, when you select transactions accepted by CALPADS, it will display all of those transactions, and SPED accepted, services accepted will both say yes. So that way, when you go back to your reportable transactions, it will only display the transactions that were not included in this report. These are all the new transactions that have occurred since this report was generated. So that's kind of like that continual submission. This is what you're going to do throughout the entire year. You're going to generate a report, you're going to correct the errors, and then once it's error-free, you just generate a new report based on the now current reportable transactions. And you're just going to go through that through the entire year. So then making sure that you're reviewing your duplicate transactions, the blank SSIDs, and again, going through the same process to get your errors. So that is kind of like the overview. That's how the process will work. So there is some manual work that would need to be done to actually submit that file, but you're not having to download, install software, run it through the software, import it back into SACE. It's all done within SACE. So as they say, of course, we're getting tons of questions. This is new. The process isn't live yet, so you're kind of just seeing these screenshots. So do not hesitate to contact the help desk with any questions. Again, when this goes live, we are going to provide a very detailed help guide on this entire process, along with a little video on all of the steps. So now that we reviewed kind of the information and how it all works, do we want to take a quick pause? Oh, we can answer some more questions right after that. I'll do a quick overview so you can see the live system on how it will work.
And or we could take a break.
Or we could take a break.
Looking through some of the questions, let me scoot in questions.
So we have a number of questions about, like, will SELPA be able to view LEA's errors? We kind of already talked, getting a little bit of feedback, a little bit about that. So, at this point, the errors start at the LEA level. Still getting some feedback.
Is that better?
Yes. Okay. And so some of the questions we're asking, like, how do we set up a process for communicating with the LEAs if we don't know what the errors are? My initial suggestion would be they start, some of the errors are going to be like, you didn't put the right date in, or that, you need to, change this, or there's inconsistencies here in those errors, or the enrollment is not correct. Those are things that should be corrected at the LEA level first. And then when there's a process where the data needs additional review or additional concerns, then the SELPA can be engaged. We can talk about looking at different roles that the SELPA could have in terms of viewing each one of those error reports, but there could be potentially thousands of errors that are corrected at the LEA level first. So I know we're getting a lot of questions about that. We can have more discussion internally about those. I don't know if you